Was this the biggest week of the year for crypto? Between the Bitcoin 2024 conference and the Ethereum ETF launches, it certainly felt that way. We cover all this right now in the Collective Shift weekly recap, actionable insights, and a breakdown into the crypto market, all in under 30 minutes. Nick, big week?
Yeah, the big week is probably understating it in a way. We had, Trump talking and playing up the Bitcoin crowd at the conference. And then we saw the Ethereum ETF launch, which I know I was seeing a lot of mixed responses, whether it was success, whether it was a flop. So perhaps we'll get to that and more in the pod.
Yeah, when we take a look at the markets this week, it looks like a relatively flat week, but it was certainly eventful whilst you were experiencing the week. We had stocks having one of their worst weeks in about 2 years or so. So not great for the Ethereum ETF to be launching in those conditions, but we'll get to that later. And we saw a bit of a rally in crypto after it had sort of had a red week. But once, got closer to Donald Trump's sort of presentation at Bitcoin 2024, which we'll get to soon, Bitcoin rallied and the rest of the market sort of came along with it. But probably one notable thing to highlight from the last week in crypto is that continued, underperformance from ETH. It's currently down about 5% from the past 7 days, whereas BTC is up 2%. And SOL is up 6%. So that same old story. So we'll get to all that in the coming moments. And one thing that's sort of been on my mind as well, particularly impressed by with Bitcoin's price action has been these Mt. Gox distributions that we've talked about for so long. We've seen them starting to presumably, hit the actual end creditors. Like we talked about last week, our Kraken was starting to do that and Bitstamp had received some distributions. So now we assume they're getting into the pockets or the hands of customers, and some of them will be selling. So to see Bitcoin price holding up and being near $70,000 amid all those headwinds is really great to see.
Perfect. Yeah, I think it's about 42% of that total Mt. Gox Bitcoin that has been moved. So hopefully we get this behind us in the coming months.
For sure. So let's get into, two big things, as we said, Bitcoin 2024 and ETH ETFs. We'll start with the latter. How did it go all last week, Nick?
Yeah, so it was the moment we were waiting for and many months in the making here, and they were finally live. We've got about 3 days worth of full trading volume to try and get a good understanding of exactly how these were performing. The one big takeaway I had was on day one, they had about $1 billion worth of total volume, making it one of the most successful ETF launches, in the US stock market history. So easy to maybe look at some of the figures, and we'll get into this a bit later about the outflows, but it's hard not to go past that it was just such a success and there was a strong appetite to actually engage in these products. And actually the one that did the lowest amount of volume, I think it was one of the 21 shares ETH ETF. If that was an ETF by itself, it would have been in the top 95% of all ETF launches. So that's to give you a bit of perspective here. And also try and bring you back down to earth too when you're seeing a lot of the Bitcoin talk didn't quite meet the expectations of Bitcoin. Always hard to go past that considering it launched at the start of the halving and at a really time when the Bitcoin sentiment and crypto in general was really up on the way higher. Another big takeaway here is huge outflows by Grayscale. We talked about this in the pod last week and in our newsletter. They've had about $1.5 billion worth of outflows, so massive amounts of ETH leaving this trust, which was about 10% of the total trust. So all in all, with 3 days, we've actually got net outflows of about 340 million, which I anticipated in our newsletter. We may see this if Grayscale, our holders, really exited in waves, which is what we've seen in the last couple of days. So it's going to take a while, I think about a couple of weeks, even a month, to really understand exactly how much money is going to stay in the ETFs and how much is flowing out. So mixed bag here, but I still think overall very positive considering this kind of state in the market we're in. And, ETH ETF also means that we've got about, I think, 72% of the total crypto market cap that is now available in ETF products when we combine that with Bitcoin. So huge day, not just for, Bitcoin, Ethereum, but then also the wider altcoin space as Ethereum is, had got that legitimacy now of, alternative exposure to Bitcoin in the crypto market.
Yeah, well said, Nick. Great way to sort of summarize it. And I've got up on the screen here for anyone interested in going a bit further into this, that we've got the GBTC versus ETHE sort of difference. So for those of you in January, we saw a lot of negative reception to the Bitcoin ETF launch, after the first few days. So it's almost like very, very similar sort of sentiment. And that was again due to the heavy GBTC outflows. I think, a closer look, you could argue there was some more demand for the Bitcoin ETF in those opening days compared to Ethereum, but very, very similar sort of views and I guess sentiment expressed. And as you can see on the screen there, I suppose as from an Ethereum, even investor side of things, like I'm certainly wanting to this ETHE selling off and conversions to be done as soon as possible. And as you can see on the chart there, it's a lot steeper of a downward trend compared to Bitcoin. So what's it showing? It's, as you said, Nick, how many ETHE holders are deciding to now go, all right, this thing's finally launched. I'm able now to sell my holdings at market prices. And the more people that are doing that, the better, in my opinion, because it will no longer be an overhang. But just to end here, we've got on the GBTC chart, importantly, it's unrealistic to expect these to go to 0% anytime soon, as we've talked about in previous podcasts. Like, you got tax benefits and other reasons why you might still hold these existing products. So even the GBTC, we're like 6 or 7 months since the launch, and still over 40% of the old holders, the old sort of holdings are still there. So yeah, that was definitely a big talking point, as you sort of flagged that it would be. And we'll see what this week holds.
And just a bit of context there. Essentially, Grayscale just had a higher fee than the rest of the market. So that was a reason why a lot of people were thinking that a lot of that value was going to leave, because at the end of the day, if you're taking 1.5+% on that, these holders weren't able to traditionally get out of this until it converted into the ETF. And that's why they're seeing so much outflows from that product. And maybe just the one other positive I saw was that the BlackRock ETHE ETF really bumped up in the last few days, had that down of 17, billion, but million had 70 and then 87 million. So actually quite a lot of volume heading into the BlackRock ETF, which is a positive considering that if these things were a fizzle, maybe day one would have been high and then day 3, 4 would have been lower, but we're kind of seeing the opposite there and still strong interest in the BlackRock ETF.
Yeah, for sure. Well said. And these ETHE, I think the big thing everyone was wanting was a lot of these ETHE holders to sell and just go ahead and buy the other products, which definitely a portion of them. And the big unknown was how many will sell these ETHE products and just go back into cash and get out of crypto, which in the early stages, it looks like, definitely some did, given that we had net outflows. But again, these are things we won't be talking about in like a year or 2 years, like these nuances in the opening days. I think overall, we've talked about a lot of why this is such a bullish, tailwind for ETH in the years to come. So once we get through this messiness at the start, it'll be great, but we'll keep checking in on that for sure. Moving on to the other big news from the past week, and it was definitely the Bitcoin 2024 conference, as we spoke about in last week's episode. It was hosted in Nashville and had a slew of sort of big speakers, as you can see on the screen there. None bigger, of course, or none more influential when talking about market expectations and even politics as well, was Donald Trump speaking on the final day of the conference. What were your sort of highlights from his presentation, Nick?
I think it was, he took a step forward in his speech that we were kind of anticipating. We were kind of looking to see whether he was going to just explain everything that he's already done before, kind of going with the status quo, the same rhetoric that he's been talking about. But he's kind of took a step forward and mentioned something that he hasn't done before, which is that he planned to not sell the Bitcoin that is currently under the US government's administration. This is a huge deal. It's 1% of Bitcoin. And I got a quote here. He said that, a quote, "As the final part of my plan today, I announced that if elected, the United States of America, I will keep 100% of the Bitcoin the US government currently holds or acquires in the future. I hope you do well. So big statement here saying that a huge part of the supply may not move under, Republican win, which is hard to understand really. I'm not sure your thoughts there, Matt, but this is the one that everyone was kind of looking forward to as a reasonable expectation that he might do, and he kind of delivered on that.
Yeah, for sure. It was sort of a bit surreal to even though it was more or less, what everyone was expecting, or even a bit better in some people's opinion. It was still strange to see him like presenting there, and even part of me thought, it's just like AI generated. Like it doesn't look real, but he got obviously a rousing reception given everyone is pro Bitcoin at the conference. And we saw, the Democratic side, sort of Kamala Harris was sort of rumored to be attending and maybe even speaking, but later decided against that. So to see Trump there really, I suppose, rallying it up and getting all the attendees excited, it'll definitely be looked back, in the history of crypto for sure. Like this is, again, for so many reasons, like a watershed moment for crypto, and we'll see if it actually eventuates in some progress being made, in the event that Trump does win the election and goes into Washington and heads up any crypto changes.
And there was probably a few more things I noticed. He got his biggest reception actually by committing to remove Gary Gensler from SEC and move him on. This was met with, I think he repeated it 3 times. The crowd was that excited about it. Even maybe a bigger cheer than, not selling the Bitcoin, which was kind of hilarious to think about. Another one was him talking about ending the choke point 2.0, which has been going around the industry, that, current administrators have been choking the industry in certain points and not allowing people to bank and engage with the ecosystem. And finally, calling it a miracle, really lapping it up to the crowd. And then, driving that commitment about this US stockpile, which I did see get misreported. Some news organizations were calling it a stockpile of US. Others were saying that he didn't quite promise that. Essentially, he just said that he's going to not sell any of the Bitcoin that the US have at the moment or will acquire via any court cases into the future. So no hard commitment on actually buying Bitcoin, from Federal Reserve, cash flow or anything like that. But nonetheless, a huge deal. And maybe we can get into that actual bill that was put forward by Senator Lummis, who introduced a bill to create a US strategic Bitcoin reserve. This is what a lot of the rumors were circulating about. Trump didn't endorse it himself, but we do have one of the sitting senators here saying that they want to purchase 1 million BTC over time, which would be about 5% of the total supply. So this was another big headline that garnered a lot of interest at the conference.
Yeah, I think this came out quite late in the conference as well. And yeah, the initiative will begin with an acquisition of 200,000 BTC over 5 years. So yeah, around 5% of the total supply, to your point, Nick. Again, like I don't expect this, to go through, or if it does, it would be sort of watered down. But I think the more important thing is almost just it's another sort of reminder that just crypto and Bitcoin's getting in the conversation. I think in Lummis's career, I put forward 88 bills, and I think either 0 or 1 has gone through. But that's sort of the hit rate with a lot of bills, a very low percentage anyway. So look, again, getting it in the conversation, and between her news and Trump's speech, that really riled up the fans, as well as some other headlines that we'll get to as well from what was a busy weekend. Yeah,
it was a huge weekend. So what were the other maybe notable announcements that caught your eye there, Matt? I know I had a few as well.
Yeah, well, there's a list, and the one that we didn't even list down, but one that I actually saw this morning that I didn't even I'd totally missed, was that either the CEO of Van Eck or one of the board members of Van Eck came out and said that over 30% of their portfolio is in Bitcoin, which just blew my mind. I'm not sure if they were talking about their overall portfolio or if they were talking about their crypto specific portfolio. I assume it's the former, but yeah, for them to be that bullish on BTC from such a presumably wealthy person and influential person was definitely one notable one. But we've got a few more that we can whip through.
I saw that one too. I think it was his personal portfolio, which is actually even just as bullish really when you have a head of an asset manager like that saying how deep they are in crypto and Bitcoin. That's a huge statement that I didn't see as well. That was a good pick up there, Matt.
Yeah, for sure. I think let's get into the Saylor ones. What did we see with Michael?
So we saw him have his usual crazy predictions, putting I think a 3 million bear case on Bitcoin, and I can't even repeat some of the bull cases. They were just absolutely crazy numbers with Saylor trying to predict what the price of Bitcoin might be like in I think a 2-decade time frame. So he had some crazy predictions, but he also doubled down on his Bitcoin for corporations, really stressing the importance of MicroStrategy being a vehicle to not only educate, but get a lot of these corporations into Bitcoin and maybe following a similar route that they did. So that was a notable one, and hopefully we can see some actual tangible results come out of that and see, who are these big corporations that actually get into Bitcoin. Because at the moment, Bitcoin, the balance sheet was rumored as one of the biggest, bull cases for Bitcoin. That hasn't quite materialized, although there've been a few that we'll get into later that are adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet. We also had BlackRock, who their head of digital assets said that, ETF buyers have been kind of buy and holding, and they've been really haven't exited the ETF. I think they've only had one negative flow in about 6 months. So he was touting, the diamond hands of these new institutional investors and retail investors that are getting exposure by the ETF, which, really took my eye this weekend.
Yeah, that's a great point. That last comment, it's worth, if you're listening or viewing, to just rewind and go back over Nick's last point there about the BlackRock, the head of digital assets comments, because we've talked about before how many of these ETFs still aren't very accessible to a lot of people, the Bitcoin ETFs, and that we've talked about that whole thing about solicited versus unsolicited advice, and how a lot of these ETF buyers have to actively go out and request it or do a bit of their own self, learning in a way. So if they're the ones that are buying this, which they have been, because a lot of these asset managers and financial advisors still can't give out unsolicited advice, that's really, I guess, is correlated or it's sort of not surprising to learn that a lot of them are a bit more diamond hand than those who might just get it because their advisor maybe told them or recommended. So yeah, that's a great point. Some other just final ones here. We saw a major Wall Street sort of financial services firm, Cantor Fitzgerald. They announced the launch of Bitcoin financing and lending business. So we talked about how that's probably the next step for Bitcoin over the years. So that's great to see. And then also presidential candidate who's an independent, Robert Kennedy Jr. He announced his plan to create a Bitcoin Fort Knox. So he really, the crowd got really excited with him talking. I don't think anyone really gives him a chance of winning the election, but again, he's clearly, I guess, learned a lot more about Bitcoin in recent years, and again, it is getting into headlines and whatnot. But he did have some really ambitious sort of plans to acquire more Bitcoin in the event that he did get elected.
So all in all, that it was action backed. We just talked about we felt like there was more news coming out of this Bitcoin conference than maybe the last Ethereum conference, which really says a lot at the moment when we've been talking about this, renaissance of Bitcoin building and Bitcoin interest, which I think Bitcoin 2023 or 2024 really showed.
Definitely. I can't understate that enough. Just for everyone to appreciate that how big this Bitcoin 24 was. Again, I think we will be looking back at it in time as a really pivotal moment. And yeah, as we said, ETC, thousands of projects building on Ethereum. And we came out of that, not really with too much to talk about, but Bitcoin 2024 definitely was filled with announcements. And we'll get to we've got a few more to get to, but it's in it through a new lens of accumulating Bitcoin and buying Bitcoin. All of these were announced as well, sort of, I don't think at the conference, or some of them might have been, but they definitely were announced at the same time as the conference. So let's get into who's buying more Bitcoin.
Yeah, so Marathon Digital, which is one of the largest, if not the largest mining company in the world and listed on the stock exchange, they bought 100 million worth of Bitcoin and sort of plan to buy more on the open market. So huge amounts of Bitcoin being added to Marathon's, balance sheet. And it's kind of a big news story here that, hey, they're not just going to be mining their Bitcoin and selling it. They're actively kind of doubling down and in a way leveraging themselves in the Bitcoin space, which, huge deal, 100 million. That's a tangible amount of Bitcoin. We also saw some pension funds. This was another big talking point where we see pension funds start to accumulate, diversify, even if it's a very tiny amount. This is kind of making its way now. We saw State of Michigan Pension. They reported owning about 6.6 million worth of the Bitcoin ETF. So only a small amount, but it's probably that signaling that, hey, these big pensions are starting to look into it, even if it is a tiny amount. There was also another one that could be on the way with, I think it's the US Jersey City pension fund to invest in Bitcoin ETFs. I'm not sure if they've actually announced an actual purchasing of any of the Bitcoin ETFs yet, but that could be on the way because if we consider a 2% allocation to their 130 million funds, that would be about 2.6 million worth of buying. So pension funds starting to get involved there in the space, Matt.
Yeah, for sure. And I think to your point, they all add up and they're all this very high signal, like more so than the figures like, this case, 2.5 million or so. Like, I think once they do actually go ahead with the purchase, which, that the mayor sort of announced that it will be coming up. Yeah, again, 2.5 million, not really that big of a deal in terms of, nominal amount, but impact and influence, them sort of following Wisconsin, that was a big highlight and milestone for Bitcoin earlier this year. Really getting that momentum up for these pension funds. Just quickly, we'll wrap things up from the news standpoint. And we talked, Stephen, about, you mentioned Operation Choke Point, and it sort of reminded me of this news in a sense that even in Australia, it's becoming harder over the years to, the crypto on-ramps and off-ramps are definitely becoming more limited. We've talked about this over the years. Last week, we got HSBC Australia sending emails to all their customers saying that they'll no longer accept deposits where the bank thinks that it's going to a crypto exchange. So we've talked about the reasons, why this is likely happening, and tried to keep it as balanced as possible in previous content. But that's just another update there.
Maybe shifting focus now to the altcoins. Still a pretty noticeable week. I saw a few big ones here. GTO, which is one that we've been keeping members up to date with. They come out and the GTO Labs team announced that they'll be entering the restaking environment when they're building this thing called StakeNet. So it's kind of positioning GTO as a core pillar of the Solana ecosystem because GTO runs kind of like the Lido of Solana and helps provide really steady and high quality yield and helps build out kind of validator services to help people stake their Solana. This move kind of makes them like they're trying to combine forces to be the Lido, but also the Eigen layer, which is a restaking protocol on Ethereum, as well as diving into MEV, which is just a fancy term for extracting value that's conducted on blockchain. So they're kind of like this infrastructure layer, and now they're doubling down on not just becoming, stake and providing APY, but they're really getting into restaking, which is, I know, something you've been focusing on, Matt, as potential next narrative for cryptocurrency.
Yeah, really big announcement that, encourage anyone to go check out if they're interested in, the altcoin market in general. Overall, we had Aave as well. There was a post there to the forum, really proposing like a temperature check. So on Aavanomics, so just an upgrade to their tokenomics, which, to really try to keep it as simple as possible. Over the years, the Aave token, one of the big risks of holding that is like if something goes really wrong with the Aave protocol, all of these token holders would essentially have to backstop any emergency. It's similar in a way to Maker, to those who are familiar. This proposal is really like, hey, we're going to change the mechanism in a way where there's more demand for Aave. I guess the end result is there's more demand for Aave on the open market. All else being equal, that will sort of, increase the buy pressure on Aave. And again, all else being equal, which it never really is, that would lead to an increase in the price of Aave in that example. So this is a heat check, so a temperature check. So it's the first stage of a multiple stage governance process. So Aave sort of, I would say, taking over Uniswap in terms of Uniswap looked like it was going to be the first one to be, implementing a fee sharing mechanism or revenue sharing mechanism. We saw that sort of got put on ice, and now the Aave looks like it's going to be the first one. We'll see what the reception is to that one.
Yeah, that's a big one. It's kind of a watershed moment because that's the thing we've always talked about is will value finally accrue to these tokens, which traditionally have been called meme governance tokens because they just had limited utility. But if things like this pass, then they could really shape a new era where revenue is actually distributed to token holders, which is a huge deal. I think the final big one I got here is Solana again. They're just continuing to be in the news just because they were chosen to expand a tokenized credit offering from a Brevan Howard affiliated tokenization platform. So this was from, I think they're called Hamilton Lane's Scope Fund, which is an asset manager that has about 900 plus billion in total value, accumulated or, backing their products. Huge deal here. They're choosing Solana to deploy some of these funds. We saw the similar space in Ethereum with BlackRock choosing to do some tokenized funds on public Ethereum that has generated 500 million worth of value flowing into them. So Solana being chosen here, kind of a big deal and is a high signal metric here and news headline that really shows that a lot of these big asset managers are looking into Solana.
Yeah, nice, Nick. As always, there's dozens of altcoin updates every single week. Another one, for example, up here that Avail sort of going live and their token did as well. But yeah, there's many others we can get to, but those ones definitely were certainly the largest from the past week. In terms of things to look forward to, the one I have sort of highlighted for my week ahead and is one the market will be talking about, Jerome Powell's press conference. So July 30 and 31, the Federal Reserve meets to talk about what they're going to do with interest rates. I think most people are expecting them to still be held flat. As always, Jerome Powell's sort of press conference will be the most important thing to watch. That's on July 31st, sort of US time. So yeah, rate cuts coming in the second half of the year for sure. In terms of rapid fires, sort of our underappreciated, overappreciated, this week for me, I've gone underappreciated, and that's just highlighting the August sort of token unlocks. So around nearly 1 billion is going to be unlocked in August. Again, it keeps sort of flying under the radar. I think this sort of stuff because it all just accumulates. Never in isolation. There's never really been one massive unlock. But for any reminder of anyone new to crypto, these tokens, have vesting. So early investors, team members can't access these tokens for multiple years, and then they unlock years into the project's lifespan. So all of these thousands of altcoins that are out there, a lot of them have unlock pressure where investors get access to their token, and then presumably a lot of them sell it because they've already realized, or they can finally realize really sizable gains from investing in the project so early. So August definitely has a big month ahead with Wormhole and Avalanche being the main two there.
I've got another underappreciated for Lightning Labs. They added Lightning Network support to its recent upgrade to bring stablecoins to the Bitcoin ecosystem. So we know that stablecoins are approaching all-time highs in terms of total market cap. They've actually accumulated their all-time high in the top 4 centralized ones, being USDC, USDT, and PayPal USD. So that hit a new high, I think, of 140 billion, and hopefully they're challenging that 180 billion total all-time high. I'm really curious to see, hey, is there any appetite to bring stablecoins to Bitcoin? That's a big note I had for my 2024 look ahead, as I'm seeing maybe a lot of the things that we found on Ethereum gaining traction might make their way to Bitcoin, whether it's DeFi, as you talked about, collateral to lend your Bitcoin that was announced in the Bitcoin 2024 conference, and now we've got increasing ability to conduct stable coins on Bitcoin. So one to watch, and really keen to see the appetite and whether that's going to be a long-lasting impact that could change the narrative for Bitcoin.
Yeah, good find there, Nick, and we'll follow that for sure. But yeah, that does bring to a close. As we said, like one of the most eventful weeks of 2024, and even of this entire bull market. Bitcoin 2024, as well as the Ethereum ETF launch. So we'll definitely touch base next week. We'll see if it's as busy. I don't think it will be, but if it is, we're here for you. So if you're looking for more insights, see our revamped weekly shift newsletter. We have free weekly insights straight to your inbox every Friday. So you can subscribe to that at collectiveshift.io/newsletter. That's collectiveshift.io/newsletter.